And welcome back. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused many tenants to lose their income and also face possible eviction. However, days after a pause on eviction set to expire in New York, the State Court of New York actually extended a moratorium through October the 1st for residential tenants. And the question is, what exactly does this actually mean for tenants going forward? The Bronx, New York City, a lot of renters. So what does it actually mean? Joining us now to share a little bit more is the partner at David A. Gallo and Associates, Robert Link, who comes back and talks to us a little bit more about the eviction moratorium. And Robert, good to have you.
Darren, thanks a lot. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on again.
Oh, no worries. Listen, I want to get to it, right? As we said, this eviction now moratorium extends out into October the 1st. For many renters, it's a breath of fresh air. They're breathing a sigh of relief, but really, some people feel as though all this is doing is actually kicking the can down the street.
Well, that's exactly what it is doing. Quite literally, it's kicking the can down the street. When I was on with you last time, I said that I don't really see a whole lot going on in the year 2020. I think most of the cases are going to be dealt with in 2021 that relate to the pandemic. That's what we're seeing. And, you know, they're kicking the can down the proverbial road, but this is a very difficult circumstance. Again, the housing courts were already busting at the seams before the pandemic. Now, added to that, you have 15, 25, I've heard up to 30% of renters not paying their rent. So we have to take all those cases and throw them into a mix already to a system that was busting out at the seams. Now, what the court said this week is that they're going to start to open things up. Okay, they're going to start to do conferences. They're going to let things slowly move forward. Now, in the residential context, great news. October 1st is going to be the first date where they can actually execute warrants. But if you're a pre-pandemic default, you didn't pay your rent before March 17th, and someone already brought an eviction case against you, before they continue the case on October 1st, the court has to schedule a conference to see if you're eligible for any assistance, to see if the case can be worked out. And if you're not available for that conference, or if you have health concerns, there's probably an opportunity for you actually to delay that conference, to appear remotely. So that's always available. If you're not, if March 17th, and that's the default, and a case has not been brought against you yet, then we're looking after October 1st to actually bring those petitions and get you in court, and then you're still going to have those conferences. So we're talking well into 2021 before we've evaluated your defenses, before you've had your conference, and before your case starts to really substantively move forward. So you do have a nice respite to kind of gather your breath and see where things are headed.
Look,
go ahead.
I want to just jump in and ask the question, because as you talk about these conferences, we're hearing words about, you know, settlement meetings and what these conferences actually entail. So when you say conferences, what exactly goes on in the scope of these meetings?
Well, usually in the landlord-tenant context, you have your landlord attorney, you have a tenant, sometimes you have an attorney representing the tenant, and you sit down with a law clerk and you try to discuss a reasonable, pragmatic scenario where everybody's happy, where you can either repay the rent arrears, get back on track, or work out a schedule even for the litigation. That's really going to be difficult to do because we want to avoid courtroom activities. So what the courts are saying is that they're going to reach out to the parties. They're going to try to set up Zoom conferences. But Darren, as you know as well as I, not everybody's accustomed to just set up Zoom conferences. Not everyone has the technology. Not everybody has Wi-Fi, cameras, and whatnot. So it's going to be a struggle, and it's going to take a long time to get through all these cases.
Yeah, the backlog is what we talked about on the last time that we got together and talked about this backlog. With the kicking it down the can to October the 1st, what are we looking at in terms of, is this going to increase the backlog? Is this going to help the backlog? What do you predict?
Well, what they hope is that landlords are going to play ball. They're going to make deals with their tenants. If you remember from last time, there was a law passed during the legislative session legislative session in Albany, the Tenant Safe Harbor Relief Act. And what that said is if you owed money because you weren't able to pay your rent during the pandemic, they would take those, 3-6 months of rent, and the landlord would be able to get a money judgment for those unpaid months of rent, but they wouldn't actually be able to evict you on that basis. So if you can prove that you had a decrease in income as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, that's a defense to eviction. That's not a defense to actual payment. So that is going to give the tenants a whole lot of leverage to come into court and make a deal. And hopefully the idea is that that's going to incentivize the landlords to play ball, make a deal, maybe work out some sort of resolution that works for everyone, and avoid court. At least that's what the courts are hoping at this point.
Yeah, let's look at what some state lawmakers are actually putting into effect. They're trying to get this law passed, and I want you to get your perspective on it. State lawmakers are trying to actually pass a series of bills where tenants can actually see their rents canceled for the duration of the New York's health emergency, and then as well as evictions being prohibited for a full year after the state lifts its final pandemic-related restrictions. If this law passes, obviously a lot of favor is given towards tenants because, listen, they've got a hard time. But then if you're the landlord and you're a person that's depending on this money, this puts you in a whole income debacle.
It does. It creates a whole lot of questions. I do not expect the cancel rent bills to pass. I think there'll be some discussion. I think you'll see some lawmakers push for it. But the problem, you touched on it, it creates a whole lot of issues. Number one, there's a constitutional issue. Typically, when you have a contract between two consenting adults, the government doesn't get involved in the middle of it, right? And try to remake the terms of that contract. Here we're dealing with a pandemic, so there's some flexibility possibly, but to the scope that we're saying everybody has a rent holiday, well, some people are working and they can actually pay their rent. Some people live in NYCHA buildings. Will they be excused from paying their rent? Actually, the bill that I think you're referring to would set a fund aside for those public housing tenants and allow them to help pay their rent. In addition to that, you have landlords, small-time landlords who are struggling. That legislation actually sets a pool of money aside to pay those landlords. But where is the state of New York going to get that money? They're already facing declining revenues, declining tax revenues as a consequence of COVID-19. I don't see it happening. You have seen more progressive lawmakers move into the assembly ranks, so there's going to be a lot more pressure to do something, but I don't think it's going to be this bill.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about what New Yorkers have been saying. I've talked to some people who are New Yorkers who are really worried about this whole eviction process, given the fact that a lot of people have been without work and out of income. You've got people filing unemployment in massive numbers, unprecedented numbers federally and across the state. But then there comes the case of, okay, if I don't have the money, I can't stay there. And there is these evictions, which also leads into another crisis, which deals with another perspective, which is New York City's homelessness issue. If these cases are not negotiated, the anticipation is that there may be possibly a real increase when it comes to homelessness in our city. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, that's the logical continuation of this. The good news is, in kicking the can down the road, we're able to kind of evaluate these issues on a month-by-month basis. There's not going to be a massive amount of evictions in the year 2020. We'll see what happens in early 2021, but I would imagine there's going to be, in New York City, a 6 to 12 month timeline for a lot of these evictions, to have these conferences, to get the people in court that actually need to go into court to accomplish those conferences and to move this process along. So I think we're not going to have so many evictions in the near term, but that homelessness problem is something that does need to be considered. It's eventually going to, as long as we keep kicking down the can down the road, it's eventually going to pop up.
Yeah, real quickly, I got to wrap this up, but I want to get the chance to talk to you because this week, really important, commercial, when you talk about commercial buildings and those who are commercial tenants as well, some legislation coming down the pike too?
Well, as far as the relief for commercial tenants, what the administrative order says is we're not really helping. We're going out on a limb to protect residential tenants as much as possible, but commercial evictions start today. And so the commercial tenant might be getting papers in the mail, scheduling commercial evictions procedures. They're not entitled to the same conference, although it's likely that some of the New York City courts are going to be extending an opportunity to the commercial tenants to work out a case. I think the best argument for the commercial tenant is going to be, listen, I'm a barbershop, I'm a restaurant. The government forced me to, prevented me from being able to use my property for the reason that was stipulated in the lease. As a consequence, I should be excused from paying the rent because I didn't get the benefit of my bargain. That's going to be something that you want to interpose in an answer. You're going to want to answer the landlord-tenant petition, the eviction petition, and you're going to want to litigate and hire an attorney and make sure to appear in court.
All right, Robert Link, we got to leave it there. Our guest partner at David Gallo and Associates. Robert, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Daren.
All righty. Of course, we got to bring him back, and he'll continue to give us more information as we talk about this eviction moratorium. And as we kick the can down the road a little bit more, we're going to need some more counsel with regards to this. So, of course, we'll be seeing Robert in the future. That about wraps up for this segment. Listen, we've got more show. Stay with us. Open will continue coming up right after this.